Hey guys, Jake here, and some of you may know that for a while now, I've been doing some streams of all the Gran Turismo games, trying to complete all the license tests with a friend of mine before Gran Turismo 7 comes out. We did only one episode on GT4, and I completed the rest off camera. With GT3, we did all of them. With PSP, we did all of them. With Concept, we did all of them. And now I've been on Gran Turismo 5. And as you can tell by the title of this video, I have some things to say about it. Anyway, some context with me in the Gran Turismo franchise. When I was a bit younger, around 12-13 years old, I was actually quite a bit of a Forza fanboy. I absolutely love Forza Motorsport 4, and I didn't think there would be another track racing game that could ever come close to it or top it. I distinctively remember when Gran Turismo 6 came out and Tomcat made a video on it. I was disappointed because I always saw him as a Forza YouTuber. And even though my cousins had a PS3, and I played it, we never played any Gran Turismo games there. They never had any, so I never really got the chance to try the game. And whenever I would see the HUD, I always thought the game just looked strange. HUD being Gran Turismo 5 and 6, of course. Gran Turismo 3 and 4, I was even less familiar with because no one I knew growing up had a PS2, which is probably the opposite of everyone else's story that's watching this. I always grew up with Nintendo and Xbox, never had a PlayStation, never played Gran Turismo. That is, until 2017 with GT Sport. GT Sport and how high quality the game looked was really enticing to me. And then to add on top of it, all the updates they were doing and the cars they were adding for free really made me want to get a PS4. But the thing that really pushed me over the edge was not GT itself, but the state of Forza Motorsport. I could go on and on about FM7, but this is about Gran Turismo, and GT Sport really impressed me, and I actually bought a PS2 back in 2020 to play some of the older Gran Turismo titles, because I couldn't really get PCSX2 running at optimal performance. Nowadays I can, but back then that wasn't the case. GT3 I quite like, but GT4 is another beast of its own. It's become one of my favorite racing games of all time, and I think it's an absolutely excellent game. Does it have its flaws? Of course, but I still think it is an absolutely excellent game, and the GT franchise has actually really impressed me to the point where I'm starting to believe that I think as an overall franchise, I think GT might as well just be stronger than Forza Motorsport. And I'd always heard that the PS3 era of Gran Turismo was the weirdest, and it's kind of the one that made the series go out of the mainstream limelight to me. And after playing Gran Turismo 5, I understand why. The user interface in Gran Turismo 5 has to be one of the weirdest things I have ever seen. Not weird because of the UI design itself, but because of how much of a downgrade it is from Gran Turismo 4, and even Gran Turismo 5 Prologue. The first, most evident thing that I found was actually in the arcade mode. Now if you're playing Gran Turismo 4, you go into the arcade mode, you'll see these big 4 colored corners showing you the different types of courses. It's very noticeable, they're all even, and in GT5, they're relegated to these small tabs. Half the time I forget the other courses even exist and I just end up scrolling through the original courses. I don't understand what caused this change. I get why they want it to look cleaner and maybe more minimal, but I don't think it's really the way to do it when I end up forgetting that the other tabs are even there. But the real kicker with this part of the UI is how you get to a reverse version of a track. In GT4, you just find a track you want, you click on it, and then you can either go for the normal or the reverse layout from there. It's just a simple option. What is it in GT5? It's an entirely separate track that requires you to do a ridiculous amount of scrolling to get to. Who decided that instead of just clicking on the track and clicking, normal or reverse, going and having a separate version of the track, most of the time very far away, and in a completely seemingly random spot from the normal track? This also extends to cars. GT4 let you use quite a bit of cars from the start, but it was also sorted by brands. So obviously, if you just find the country you want to go to, you click on the brand, and you see the brand's cars. Makes sense, am I right? In GT5, how about we do the same thing? Because, there's going to be over like 800 to 1,000 cars, so there might be a lot of confusion and it might look kind of bloated if we just put it all into one list, right? Look, GT5, I know it lets you use a lot less cars in the arcade mode, which I think is a downgrade in and of itself, but it also takes ages to scroll through this list of, a much smaller amount of cars. And everything I've been complaining about so far with the user interface is just in the arcade mode. If you back up to the home screen, you'll see these neat animations play similar to like GT Sport, but if you want to have it on idle, just have a nice background, no! You have to be informed that the Gran Turismo 5 online service has come to an end. no enjoying the backgrounds for you. No, it's come to an end. But when we actually get into the UI, okay. There are 5 different kinds of icons. First, there are the differently shaped squares that are kind of like the main part of the screen on the right. There's these 4 icons, which are more kind of skeuomorphic. They don't really follow much of a shape. And then you have these little circles here with a bunch of stuff, including your garage, which is one of the most important things you should have access to. Shouldn't it be bigger than, you know, the music library? And then there's also the little squares on the left, which hold your settings and the exit button and stuff like that. But this whole left side just looks weird because there's way too many icons going on. And like I said, some of the most important stuff, like your garage, is the same size as everything else, and it feels extremely strange. And then when actually going into the garage, the tabs of standard cars and premium cars are on the left, which just makes it a little bit hard to navigate your actual garage. I think GT4 had a much better sorting system. In fact, I think GT4 had a better garage UI and sorting system than any modern game does. It handles having a ton of cars without making things look bloated. But GT5's whole left pane tab thing with standard versus premium cars. Oh yeah, speaking of that, I forgot to talk about standard cars. Standard cars, in my opinion, are the most un-polyphony-like thing they could ever do. Gran Turismo was a series that was originally applauded for its attention to detail and realism, so why would they completely break the immersion with 2 different types of cars? When you have a standard versus premium model on the same track in the same race, it's extremely noticeable and immersion breaking. When it's all standard cars, it's not as bad, but the cars still look completely out of place with the track. And I just tend to notice that in Gran Turismo 5 and 6, these cars look awful. Like they just don't look good, but in GT4, they look fine. That's really because of the lighting model at hand. The upgrades in GT5 for the PS3 allowed for a better lighting model, and that lighting model really, you know, sheds some light on these car models and how good they really don't look. I feel like the standard cars should have been some kind of post-game unlock. The game should have been advertised with around 300 cars, and then once you finish the main game, not 100% of course, you get like a standard car dealership where you can buy the standard cars for like a cheap price. And I think that would have been a great addition to GT5. That would have, you know, really surprised people because they only expect 300 cars, and hey, you get a bunch of extra ones afterward as an extra. Even though they look worse, hey, you can drive these. And speaking of the standard car dealership, I have to talk about the used car dealership in GT5. The used car dealer in GT4 was quite cool. There were 3 different ones of 80s and before, early 90s, and late 90s, and these would typically include really cheaper, niche cars that you would never really see in a racing game. Tons of Daihatsus, standard Civics, stuff like that. And there were some pretty cool cars in there as well. There were some RX-7s, NSXs, stuff like that. And everything was laid out in a pretty nice list. You got to see the color of the car in the top left, you get the name of the car, and there weren't too many to go around, but there was still enough to have, you know, a good time looking through the catalog. Now, what does the used car dealer in GT5 look like? What is this? So instead of having 1 row of cars with, you know, some detail as to what the car is and some of its stats, there is just this tiny little rectangular icon to where I can't even tell the name of the car half the time. And on top of this, there were also some very, very expensive cars. So if you want some of those race cars, you have to look in the used car dealer. But the worst part about the used car dealership in GT5 is not the kind of cars, it's not the amount of them shown in the UI, but it's that most of the car list is actually locked off to the used car dealer. The standard dealership in GT5 only sells the premium cars. The used cars are all standard. And for the longest time, I didn't know that there was a Toyota Yaris or Vitz in the regular dealership, and I was trying to find one for quite a while in that used dealership, and it just didn't pop up for me. And for the longest time, I couldn't do one of the championships in the game to actually level up to unlock some more of the license tests. And that brings me to my next problem. The progression in GT4 is one of the things it's most famous for. If you're stuck on one thing, there's so much else left to do. Stuck on one of the main series professional events, you can go do a 1-meg race, a driving mission, one of the European, Japanese, American events. Go get some better medals on the license tests. But when I was doing some of the license tests for GT5, I had to get to the super license to complete our stream playthrough of it. And I wasn't at level 15, which you need to be at level 15 to do the super license for some reason. Even though I've successfully completed all the previous license tests, okay, I decide, yeah, I'm gonna go get to level 15. And I noticed just a lot of the championships I either didn't have a car for, couldn't find one, or, you know, some of them were way too much money, like the Supercars Championship. Some of them required a used car, but a lot of them I had done already that I had access to. It felt like I was looking for quite a while to try to find something that I could use to level up. There's just a lot less options and content in GT4 in this regard. But oh, Jake, they added content via the separate B-Spec mode. You see there on the right? B-Spec in GT4 is actually really cool. Despite on paper seeming a little strange, it's just a mode where essentially instead of you driving at the start of the race, you can select for the B-Spec driver to play and an AI will drive for you. You can do some simple commands like telling the driver to overtake or how fast you want the pace to be, etc. This is really good for tracks that you really hate or the endurance races because if you actually go to the leaderboard menu, you can speed up the game's time by 3 times, making the endurance races not nearly as long. It's a really good tool when you want to use it. GT5, it's relegated to its own entire career mode. All of these events are just for watching an AI driver drive. You have a difficult event in A-Spec, you know, the events that you drive in. No, you can't hire the B-Spec driver to help you out for a certain event. No, it's its own separate career mode. I can't get around. Who thought of this? Who thought of this? And to top it all off, you can't speed up the events either. If someone can tell me a reason for B-Spec being its own career mode, I would love to hear that in the comments. And for my last subject, I want to circle back around to the game's visuals. Of course, only made worse by the standard cars. Even when you are driving all premium cars, this game does not look like it would be in development for 4 years after the PS3 launched. This game, and even GT6 to an extent, looks rough. When I first played it on my PS3, I immediately thought, wow, Forza Motorsport 4 and 3 look much better than this. It's especially funny when you consider that GT5 was delayed for so long, doesn't have the cockpit view in all the cars, and also consider the fact that GT was also part of Sony's big, massive PS3 hype in 2005-2006 that ended up being super misleading. GT5 doesn't actually run at 1080p resolution. It has tons of screen tearing. The visuals and details on the trackside of certain tracks like Cape Ring look so rough, sometimes to the point where it just looks like an Assetto Corsa mod. And if you know what basic Assetto Corsa mods look like, you know that's an insult. And the lighting in some of the interiors of the cars just looks so flat and strange. GT Sport also has this issue to an extent, but the rest of the game's graphics look so nice that I can ignore it. But again, even with all premium cars, this game looks rough. And then of course, adding in standard cars just makes it look worse. Not even because the car models themselves are much worse, but because of the visual inconsistency of the track that doesn't even look all that fantastic, plus these terrible looking cars in this lighting model that makes them look terrible. GT5 to me is easily the worst GT game I have played, and I don't think my opinion will change on that. GT5, when you compare it to many other games, is still a decent game, but compared to the rest of the GT franchise, it is low. I know many people have nostalgia for this game, but I didn't play this online, nor did I have a PS3 when I was younger at all. I didn't play any GT game when I was younger, as I said in the intro, so this is kind of just how I feel about the game going into it much later. Now, what game do I actually like going into much later? GT5 Prologue. I got GT5 Prologue before GT5, And I actually really like Prologue. The game doesn't feel awkward like GT5 does, with the weird driver animations that you see in the home screen, the weird depth of field effects. The home screen actually looks really nice. All the environments are really nice. I think the music selection, at least in the menus, is way better. And the graphics just look better in my opinion. All the tracks they include in here are ones that feel like they're not really missing detailed trackside. And of course all the cars in Prologue are premium. And it makes me wonder how many people this misled, thinking, oh wow, there's probably 1,000 cars in Gran Turismo 5 like they list in the marketing that have this level of detail, when that is not the case at all. And Prologue obviously doesn't have the full career mode or anything, but it's still an enjoyable game to progress through. It's enjoyable just to drive in. It has a good car selection, albeit small, but it just feels like the package that GT5 should have came in more, if that makes any sense. It just feels like a much more polished product than the full game came out to be. And if you're looking for a PS3 era GT game, I highly recommend it. I know many people will probably disagree with this video, but I feel like GT5 is probably the roughest game in the series, and I wanted to share why. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys later.